Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavors of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your technical questions answered, and contribute to the community forum. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our construction tech or weekly Global Passive House Showcase webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Well, happy new year and welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand.
And I'm Zack Semke coming to you from Seattle, Washington. Happy 2023.
Yes, may it be a good one. I think it could be a good one. There's some really good stuff going on.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
And some good stuff at the accelerator, but also some great stuff happening on I was going to say the periphery, but it's not really the periphery. It's in the industry, with people starting to think about, particularly carbon. There's so much going on about carbon, decarbonising the building industry, and just thinking about both embodied carbon, operational carbon, and I think it's becoming more and more talked about, and it's certainly a useful metric to make some of the important design decisions about sustainability overall and over the life of the building. So, exciting times, and he's hoping for a great 2023. I'm hoping to get to a couple of conferences this year again. It'd be exciting to get the team back together and support a whole bunch of really exciting events going on that are planned for this year. So hopefully we'll see people in real life again.
Indeed. Germany being the first location. So we'll see you there.
Well, yeah, there's Germany, there's the Passive House Network.
In Denver.
There's the Australian Passive House Association with the South Pacific conference coming up, I think in May. And then Fierce down in
Houston,
in Houston, which I think is going to be really interesting as well, because there's obviously a bit of a focus on warmer climates down there, and the relevance of Passive House to those warmer climates, which feels very relevant to me right now. It's pretty warm. Having our middle of our very warm summer, so I'm appreciating fresh air, and anywhere that does a decent job of keeping down the relative humidity as well is a big part of my life at the moment.
It's kind of hard for me to imagine at this moment. It's so cold, but it's good. You know what I'm particularly excited about this time of year, especially being in the Northwest, where the days are starting to get longer. That's a really
past solstice.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, great interview this week. Last week we're rolling straight on through. Great introduction to the New Buildings Institute, which I really enjoyed, and we're carrying on that this episode with Ralph DiNola, who's the CEO of the institute, and great chat that you had with him late last year. But before we get into that, let's say hello to some of our sponsors.
Yes, a big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel Foam Glass Gravel, Minitair All-in-One HVAC and Dehumidification Units, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Thanks to our champion sponsors, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, Proseco, and Source 2050. And thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
Awesome. All right. Now, we did a great sort of overview of the Institute's New Buildings Institute last week. You want to give us a bit of a intro to Ralph?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, this came as a bit of a surprise that I had the opportunity to interview Ralph. I knew that I was going to be able to get some time with Mark Lyles and also to do a little tour of the building. And it just so happened that Ralph had a little bit of time. So Ralph is, at the helm of this critically important organization, the New Buildings Institute. We talk a lot about retrofits, interestingly, in this conversation. So new buildings doesn't mean just new construction. I think it's more about the new concept, the new way of building that we all need to transition to. That organization is going to be playing a really important role, has been already playing an important role, and will play a critical role in the coming months and years as all of these states who are interested receive money from the Inflation Reduction Act to dramatically improve their building energy codes. The New Buildings Institute has helped kind of write and create a bunch of great ideas around how to transition to better code. They're very involved in the IACC work. They're involved at ASHRAE. So they're kind of like at the center of everything. And now there's, this wave of money and support for lots of work. So I think they're going to have a big year. So at the kind of cusp of that, I had the chance to talk with Ralph. And I started, it's a little bit of a unique conversation for an interview. I started asking him, so what do you want to talk about, Ralph? And and I expected, kind of a back and forth, but he kind of had this fully formed little verbal essay that he provided there to that prompt. And so we just kept that in as the beginning of the recording and then went with it. So I think that's where we'll start the conversation now. What do you think the audience of Passive House practitioners and geeks and curious need to know or hear about?
Well, I think probably the most important thing to be thinking about right now is the transformation of the building sector that is underway and that is going to accelerate pretty rapidly, I would say, over the next few years, and necessarily. So, I think it's interesting. The Passive House Accelerator, fantastic, exactly what we need. And recognition that the strategies and the metrics of Passive House can really be useful in any climate zone, and now I think we know any building type. So I think the idea that a building can be very low energy is really critical. The question about new construction versus existing buildings, I think, is also critical. And I understand there's going to be more of a focus on taking Passive House strategies and seeing how they apply to existing buildings. And that is absolutely timely and critical.
Yeah.
So, something like 120 million buildings in the US, think about globally, what we have to do. So I think getting after carbon emissions and all of the other challenges we have with existing buildings, that Passive House can be just absolutely essential tool, I think, to getting that right. So I think from my perspective, New Buildings Institute, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary this year, and we've been talking about the next 25 years. And I think that, we're at this nexus point, in the industry. There's like more than $1 trillion of funding coming into the economy for decarbonization. A lot of that is going to be focused on buildings being like, 38% of the emissions challenge. But there's so much more to it that I think is something that we need to talk about. So I think what I'm hearing and seeing more and more is how do we eliminate on-site combustion? And again, thinking about passive house buildings, on-site combustion is really not necessary, or actually more of a harm than a good, like with most buildings, but especially a passive house building. So, so I think I guess that's what I'm thinking about at the moment, like the critical nature of trying to get these standards into new construction codes, which, we've done a lot of that work in our codes and policy group here at New Buildings Institute. But then what's the strategy for transforming existing buildings? And we know every building is different, and making an existing building a passive house building can be really challenging and probably also expensive. What are the things that we can do that are not difficult and not expensive to kind of get to that level of performance?
That is fantastic and a wonderful introduction, I think, to this conversation that I have the pleasure of having right now with Ralph DiNola, who is the Executive Director, CEO of New Buildings Institute. Yeah. So it's just a real pleasure for me to have the chance to talk to you, Ralph. And we're here at the PAE Living Building, which is also home to the headquarters of New Buildings Institute, known as NBI by many. I mean, you're just such an important piece of this whole ecosystem and this whole transition that we all want to make with our buildings. So kudos. Yeah. And let's dive into the questions that you just raised now. Sure. I mean, that was just like this wonderful capsule there. So how do we take those steps with existing buildings? What are your thoughts, and what are the I know that there's a whole bunch of visioning work that just culminated today, right, for you all and the board at NBI, if I understand. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, Zach. So we did wrap up our annual meeting for NBI today with the board of directors, and we also bring our senior fellows into a segment of that called the State of Play, where we're really kind of thinking about what's happening now, what our fellows and board members are working on, and how does New Buildings Institute need to think about that as an opportunity for engaging in the market. So that, and we've also been working on our next strategic plan. So there was a lot of discussion about that yesterday as well. So we're getting a lot of really critical input from our board, from our senior fellows, and our directors team that helps to move this agenda forward. In terms of existing buildings, it's complicated, and I've been working. My undergraduate degree is in historic preservation, my master's in architecture, so I have a fondness for existing buildings, and I know that there's just a lot of challenges. What I think is interesting is it doesn't matter if you're a project manager working at NBI, or you're a CEO of a major utility at a conference. Everyone always kind of brings it back home to their own personal home, right? And so that's how we relate to things. So how do you think about your own home or the building you work in, and saying, how am I going to transform this building? We happen to be, very fortunate to be in the PAE Living Building as our office building. Right. And a tremendous amount of work went into making this a success. But then we have to be looking at, what about that building across the street? Because we actually looked at that building across the street as potentially a new office space for us. And so we cannot build our way out of the climate challenge, right? Except through major renovation of existing buildings, and getting them tuned up to perform well. So So I think there's a really important place for new construction and buildings like this one, and then I think we've got to really sort out what to do. So it feels like new construction. It's like, well, it's a no-brainer that we should be doing at least passive house, and we should be doing things like living building. And then when you look at existing buildings, it's like, okay, this is where the challenge is, and we know we need to somehow tackle it. Yeah. So we've been working on codes, kind of getting to zero in codes, and we've been working on national model codes and moving them over the next couple of cycles to be basically zero energy or carbon neutral. And now we're working on those same kind of standards for existing buildings. And so we're doing that. And I think we should have more collaboration with passive house organizations that are trying to do this in existing buildings. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a set of measures that we need to be starting to think about. And I think there's also strategies assessing existing buildings, assessing portfolios of existing buildings, and really trying to determine, which ones are the best performers, which ones are the worst performers, which ones we could have a better return on investment when we go and do that renovation work. And we know we've got to probably tackle 80% of the building stock over time. But which one should we prioritize? And that just starting with that assessment. We have a tool called First View, which is basically a remote assessment tool that simply takes 12 months of utility data, a weather file, and can provide a very kind of high-level assessment of a building or a portfolio to say, this is how it's performing, and then breaks out the energy end uses. So, the heating and cooling and lighting and breaks it out into, something that you can understand and starts to give you a sense of where to focus, and then target things like audits. And my understanding is ASHRAE, everyone thinks about ASHRAE level 2 auditing. And so my understanding is ASHRAE is changing the methodology of their auditing protocol to be a decarbonization audit, which is great. So this is I think another step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. And then on the federal side, so I don't know if you know, but one of our directors, Smita Gupta, who's a director at New Buildings Institute, was invited to be part of the Council on Environmental Quality for the White House.
I saw that on LinkedIn. Yes, I did a few months ago.
Yeah. So she just presented to the board and has been working as she's her detail there is to be the director of federal facility decarbonization.
That's so cool.
So
cool.
Something like 300,000 buildings in the federal portfolio. And so that opportunity for leading by example is what she's focused on. 24 of the major agencies in the United States that are going to be basically trying to meet the executive order of the Biden administration around building decarbonization. So so they've just been working on building performance standard. So they just released the federal building performance standard. And that just came out, I believe, last week. And that's going to help to at least set the metrics for those existing buildings to meet the decarbonization requirements through that federal building performance standard. One of the interesting things about it is that it has a metric of basically eliminating Scope 1 emissions. And so Scope 1 emissions is direct combustion of fossil fuels in buildings. And so that building performance standard is going to do a lot to decarbonize the federal building stock. But the other parts of it, one thing is to convert fossil fuel-based equipment into electric equipment. But then what about the envelope and weatherization and getting to all those things as well?
Right, which has direct implications for the grid and our ability to decarbonize as quickly as possible the grid and not overload it, right?
Yeah.
And what about, I think that one of the pieces about, just a home remodel, period, and then certainly any retrofit is that there's just naturally a cost associated with that.
Yeah.
What about sources of funding, maybe IRA money, or there's also just a reality that we probably need some money to help fund these improvements.
Yeah.
What's your sense of the opportunity there?
Well, clearly the funding, the $369 billion coming through the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of that focused toward low and moderate income families and through rebates and tax credits. So that's going to be, a good infusion of funding to get this kind of work done. And then, on a household basis, I think what I was hearing the other day, so was it yesterday or the day before yesterday was the White House Electrification Summit. And one of the ideas that was kind of floated out about the IRA is basically the federal government is giving low and moderate income families a bank account of over $10,000 to do this work, right? Mm-hmm. So through those incentives, those will be available to do specific things like upgrading appliances and heating equipment, water heating, things like that. So, and then incentives for electric vehicles, which, we have 2 electric vehicles, one hybrid, one electric, and the cost to fuel those vehicles is much lower.
Right.
So providing incentives for both new vehicles, used electric vehicles for the first time being incentivized. But I know getting back to the homes, we need to electrify equipment, but at the same time, weatherization is needed. So getting in and figuring out whether there can be a way to make it more airtight, of course, and then upgrading windows, insulating, things like that, providing good ventilation. So, but I think the question that I'm curious about, and this is where you probably have more knowledge than I do around envelope, right, in existing buildings. And I know there's the Realize program that RMI was running, right, where you actually just reskin the whole building from the outside,
right,
and you get this
energy sprung model.
Yeah, energy sprung, phenomenal.
Yeah,
not every building can do that,
right.
And some buildings lend themselves to that more than others. So clearly that's an important process and step. But what's the kind of, other than energy sprung, how do we get a much better envelope in existing buildings? Right.
I mean, I think that is it continues to be an open question, but there are a lot of really smart people, trying to tackle that question. There's the energy sprung model, and that you mentioned. There's a really great practitioner. I'm spacing out his name right now, but we've had him on the podcast actually, who's based in the UK, who calls them tea cozies, and so he creates these prefabricated tea cozies that go over these buildings, and he's bringing the cost down to a place that it looks like it's feasible to do a lot of these projects. But it's not easy. I mean, you have like Retrofit New York working to tackle the problem, and the Realize project. I think that there's hope that we could find prefabricated panel solutions that could go around buildings, and I think there's still work being done on that. Mm-hmm. I think there's also the kind of basic principle that PHI, and I'm sure FIAS also espouses, is that when you touch when you touch a system of the building, that at that moment you do it right. You do that. You make sure you're not locking in a half measure when you make an intervention in a building. And I feel like that probably then also can jibe with the. I think Architecture 2030, and I'm sure you guys talk about this too, that how important it is to look at the capital improvement cycle for buildings. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is less applicable to a single family house, but and how much more economical it is to make your big energy retrofit intervention when you're already going to be switching out equipment or making some other improvement. Mm-hmm.
I think that applies to all buildings. I think that, in my mind, quite a while ago, I raised this idea of what I was calling future-ready buildings, right? And so a future-ready building, an existing building, you begin with the end in mind, right? This is like a natural step principle, right? Where you begin with the end in mind. You say, like, I want my building, my home, or whatever, to be zero energy or carbon positive in the future. And then you basically develop a plan, like a capital improvement plan that gets you there over time. And RMI talks about this as getting to zero over time. And so it makes sense as a concept. But then what that means is that everything you do moving forward should be in lockstep with that, right? So you have the plan. You know that when your gas water heater goes out, you're going to put in a heat pump water heater. And when your
exactly, yeah.
When your gas stove, immediately change out your gas stove to an electric stove and things like that. But at some point, your roof is going to need to be replaced. Is that a time to think about that roof system? Can it be adapted for photovoltaics, or is there a way to improve the insulation of the home when you're doing that, and things like that? So I think, yes, every building, every time there is some step that you take, you could do a better version of it. But if you think about the whole thing over a period of time, and I agree with you, I think there's this durability cycles of different elements of a building, some longer than others. So we've got the advanced water heating initiative, so we're really driven about transitioning all water heating to heat pump water heaters, because it's 3 times more efficient than gas or electric, and it's it's just such a better technology, but most people are not aware of it, and that takes some planning, because that a water heater is going to fail on a Sunday or on a holiday, and people are reticent to upgrade their equipment when it's working fine. So that's kind of one of the interesting challenges, I think. So I would say the other thing, and I don't know where Passive House is going in terms of existing building retrofit, specifically, but it seems to me like there's this idea of kind of percentages, like how far do you get to a Passive House envelope with an existing building? Because maybe 80% of the way is good and is good enough. Probably one of the more critical things that I wonder, your listeners, and I don't know if you've done segments on this, so correct me if I'm missing that, but building grid integration is absolutely critical to this whole decarbonization of the building stock.
Yeah.
And so if we could marginally improve envelopes, I mean, not marginally, but improve them as much as we can cost effectively, but really work on how we shift load and how we shift that load to a low carbon, time in the grid. That has a really significant impact, and you can do that fairly, soon, right away. And we're getting to the point where electric vehicles will have that vehicle to grid opportunity where you can actually generate solar, put it in your car, and then use that power from your car. That's nascent. There's pilots going on, but it seems to me like that's the future, and there's going to be $1 billion of school buses, electric school buses being delivered, and those could be connected to schools and being that battery for the school to be a better grid player.
No, absolutely. Lisa White from FIAS is really kind of focused in on that question of the integration of buildings and the grid, and is doing some really interesting work around that. But no, absolutely, I think that's critically important, and I think that there are elements of that are actually influencing the work that Graham Wright at FIAS is doing around the kind of rethink of or kind of revision or new edition of the retrofit standard at FIAS. And I imagine there's similar thinking going on at PHI, but I just know that there's this a real interest in figuring out what the optimal move is to decarbonize existing buildings, and recognizing that you can't understand that question without understanding how the building is interacting with the grid, because that's where operational emissions happen. I mean, once we electrify our buildings. So which is, I think, it's really hopeful that the grid, the fact that the grid will be over time getting clean, becoming clean, because then we can make a major gains by electrifying, So then the question becomes, how do we limit those loads and particularly the seasonal ones, like the what do they call them? The dark doldrums, as they say in Germany, right? When it's dark forever and so there's no solar energy, and then it's not windy for a couple of weeks, and it's cold in the middle of the winter. It's that moment when passive house buildings or energy efficient buildings can really sing and make a big impact and allow us to not have to massively overbuild our clean energy infrastructure. So it's a really interesting set of questions, and I think that it's going to be really fascinating, I think, to see how our thinking shifts as we understand better and better the carbon implications of efficiency, the carbon implications of this grid transition that we're making. It's just everything. Where we're sitting now is so much different than it was 5 years ago, and it's going to be so much different, in a few years. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, in my mind, I think this is the work we're really focused on right now at NBI. So we have the Grid Optimal Buildings Initiative, which is we in the first phase of that initiative, our team developed a set of metrics, what makes a building grid friendly. So there's 8 key metrics for that. We also had that basically put into a LEED pilot credit. So there's actually a grid friendliness pilot credit in LEED for that. But moving forward, we want to get this grid optimal kind of approach into codes, and we're working on that. So, for instance, in IECC 2024, we want to get it into utility programs. So, can we get incentives to take building grid integration beyond just kind of standard DR to a much more kind of interactive building? So that there's a pilot project we worked on through that initiative, Sonoma Clean Power. It's their headquarters down in Santa Rosa. And it's this kind of exemplar of what a building could do. And that's a retrofit. So cool. Taking a kind of a pretty bad 70s building and upgrading it to be low energy and grid interactive and really a demonstration of what's possible. So that initiative, the Advanced Water Heating Initiative, again, both unitary residential units and kind of central commercial units that are heat pump water heaters, and especially so Mark Frankel, former staff at NBI, he's now at Ecotope.
Yeah, I know him well.
Yeah. So he's jazzed about this because you can imagine if you're doing a multifamily building and you're basically changing the water heating from, for instance, gas boilers to heat pump water heaters, you can basically build that system to be sized to be grid responsive, right? So you might have a little bit more storage capacity so that you can throttle the heat pumps and use energy when it's clean. Like today, hey, sun's shining here in Portland, and I'm sure in Seattle. Yeah. And then basically have that hot water for the evening when the sun's not shining, and so that's an exciting development. Utilities can partner and potentially invest in that system and use it as a flexible load. And if you imagine, there's a lot of multifamily buildings around, a lot of commercial buildings around. You could have just this whole set of virtual batteries, with thermal storage.
Right.
And it's the thermal storage is a lot less expensive than battery electric storage, and so I think people are not always thinking about that as a strategy, but but that and now there's actually a new product on the market that is basically using that same methodology for home heating, where you're kind of using the thermal storage in a hot water tank for being able to do flexible load with heating with heat pumps on the residential scale. So, So that's interesting too. So
it is, and it's cool how all of these things that we've been discussing also are reinforce one another. So, if you kind of have a foundation of an energy efficient envelope, energy efficient building to drive down the loads in the first place.
Right.
And then you have the electric car, the electric vehicle that you can use for storage of electrons.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have, the water tanks and actually the building itself can also be a source of thermal storage that then you can play around with demand response and really then only sip the energy from the grid when it's clean. You're making some serious headway. So it's exciting stuff. I appreciate that you guys are kind of diving into that, like how to optimize that for all of us.
Yeah, and those measures, a lot of them are, let's just say most of what we're talking about is now just standard equipment, right? And this is not tremendous innovation, although the innovation is coming in terms of more efficient heat pumps and lower global warming potential refrigerants and things like that. So that's definitely the next horizon, I think. And, I cannot say, I would love to see basically a metric of the word heat pumps or the phrase heat pump, and how in terms of like in the mass media, like the rise of heat pumps, whoever knew, because
I know, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a foundation program officer 6 months ago saying, should there be another term? Should there be another term?
Yeah, it's like, I think passive house is probably the only term that's worse than heat pump in this space.
Right. But, what's interesting is if you say it often enough, and people start to understand exactly what it is and what it does, because it's very descriptive.
It's true.
It is pumping heat from one way or the other.
Right.
So it is, I think, naturally going to become part of the lexicon in American culture, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, Ralph, I know you're a very busy man. I know you have a meeting coming up here. It's been, like I say, just a pleasure to be able to squeeze some time out of your schedule and have this conversation. So thanks for everything you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Yeah, appreciate it.
That was Ralph DiNola, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the New Buildings Institute in Portland. Great. I really enjoyed that chat, Zach. I'm so glad that you made it happen while you were down there.
Like I say, it was a pleasure. What a great brain doing a lot of good work.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Some really great comments and some sentiments in there straight off the bat. I really like what he said at the start, to say that we can't build our way out of climate change. And you said at the start that the name's a little bit deceptive, because the New Building Institute isn't just about new buildings. It also, we're doing work on retrofits, which is also Ralph alluded to at the towards the end there, talking about some of the really important work that's going on in that space. And we have talked about that, and I think we will carry on talking about it, that we really need to figure out what we're going to do with existing buildings, because there's so much of what already exists is going to still contribute to us either hitting or not achieving the goals that we need to by, as soon as we can, but certainly by 2050. So, solutions that help to reduce the impact of our existing buildings are really, really important. He mentioned, or you both mentioned, some of those initiatives that are in play. You talked about Energy Sprung, but there's a few others as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I wanted to make sure. So we talked about Energy Sprung. We talked about some of the new thinking that's going on around retrofits at FIAS. We talked about the Realize program. One thing that I forgot to mention, which is we have to highlight it because it's a really exciting program as well, and that's the Outfit program that's being spearheaded by PHI and I think the University of Innsbruck. So the Outfit program is essentially taking that concept of Energy Sprung, but bringing it up to retrofit levels of performance. So it's like Energy Sprung with Passive House. So just a really critical program as well.
One of the big themes about, the Institute's a lot about policy, and Ralph talked about a lot of the work they do with the federal portfolio. 300,000 buildings in the
federal portfolio. I know.
That's and that would be common around the world, where you have state agencies that run services, and those services are run out of offices and buildings, and some of those organizations, have vehicles, and they have all these other things that they need buildings for. So it is a big number, and that's why it's significant to have guidelines, rules, policies, whatever, that influence those organizations that on a broad scale with sustainability goals. And then that trickles down to the buildings, which means that you suddenly have this big push, this big driver for any new buildings, but also upgrading existing building stock to meet energy standards. And then that becomes a really big driver for the whole industry, because if that requirement is there, then any contractor that works on those buildings then has to learn about how they're going to achieve that. Any of the designers, architects that are working on those buildings are going to be subjected to achieving those standards. So it's a great way for governments anywhere to start to influence the industry, not just through upgrading codes, but by walking the talk and saying, we're going to do it with our own buildings, and then that's showing the way, and showing leadership, and also bringing the whole industry in behind. So, that's a pretty significant thing that might be starting to happen in the background in the building industry.
Yeah, and it also points to how well placed New Buildings Institute is right now with the Smita Gupta at the White House, right, assisting with that work. Last week we heard from Mark Lyles, who is a voting member of the ICC and also of ASHRAE 227P. The Passive Building Standard. So, and just a lot of great people doing, who have lots of important ideas in good spots.
Well, I think the thing for me is that you particularly have known some of these people and how great they are. What's really exciting is other people are now appreciating that and bringing in these expertise and asking them questions and guidance, and people who have been working in this space for a while now finding themselves in situations where they're influencing policy and being asked by people about, what should these metrics be. So that's really exciting that it's starting to get attention from beyond just all of us who have drunk the Kool-Aid already.
Right.
Some other stuff that Ralph talked about was obviously electrification. I like the way he matched up what can be perceived as a challenge between or a balance between electrification and weather tightness, but it doesn't have to be. They're not mutually exclusive. That's part of good design is to improve the energy efficiency while you're going through an electrification process, but then also upgrading the thermal envelope with a mind to weather tightness issues. So that integrated design approach, I think, was quite a strong theme. I really liked what he went on to talk about around being grid friendly, and then you added some really good points to that about not just overall energy demand, but reducing those peaks. And I think you said I really like the term sipping energy from the grid rather than just taking big gulps of it, but just having that little top up every now and again. That's a huge saving for electricity infrastructure. So it's flattening out those curves and those peaks and troughs rather than just having sort of a more flatline demand.
Yeah, it makes the difference between this clean energy transition or the transition to a clean energy grid. It makes the difference between that being feasible and infeasible. Because if we don't address energy efficiency as part of that, then we'll have a massive need to build a massively larger grid. And honestly, with as we look at scaling up energy infrastructure in the U.S. with the passage of the IRA, one of the biggest hurdles that we have is not in my backyard problems and getting permitting and all that. That's already an issue. And so, we would be foolish not to take advantage of the opportunities to reduce the load, reduce the demand through efficiency. Yeah,
absolutely. Good stuff. Such great introduction to a really important organisation. I'm very glad you made the trip. Anything else there from
no, I got to. So I after my conversation with Ralph, I had the chance to tour the building. He led a little impromptu tour of the PAE Living Building, which is this great spot. And one of the things I talk about, I always reflect on my first experience of a passive house was, back in the day, it was probably 12 years ago in the Karuna house. And I was just taken by the quality of the air in that building. Yeah. And, I had the same experience here at the PAE Living Building. I will note the PAE Living Building is not a passive house. It's a living building, and certainly lots of passive design ideas went into that building, but it's not a passive house. But it is a great place to be in, and was really fun to visit. So, and then I got to hang out with Ralph and a number of staff members for a happy hour afterward, and got to hang, enjoy their banter. It's a great team that they've got there.
Nice.
Yeah, it was fun.
I imagine a great building would attract great people.
Yeah. And a great mission before that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and a great mission as well. It's certainly an impressive looking organisation. And we did put some links last week, but we might add some more links back to this episode's show notes, so you can check out. They've got some great resources and just some information on the New Buildings Institute website. And also do have a look around. Pretty easy to find some photos and some other information on the PAE building itself. That's worth checking out too. And also you can do that on the accelerator, because that building has been featured in previous lives on the Passive House Accelerator. Awesome. What have we got coming up on the accelerator in 2023?
2023 is going to be a huge year for us. The thing I'll mention now is that we're about to launch the new iteration, the new version of Passive House Accelerator Live. That's going to happen on the second Wednesday of January, so January 11th. So this first Wednesday, the Wednesday this week, we're not doing an Accelerator Live, but we will start next week. So we're going to launch on the 11th with the first episode of our new series, which is called the Next Gen series. So the next generation of passive house practitioners and leaders. That is going to be co-hosted by Zoe Kaufman of NREL and Carmel Pratt of Bright Power. And every week they'll have a guest presenter from that next generation present about their work, their project, and get a chance to learn from these really exciting folks. Zoe and Carmel are both members of that generation, and this first episode will focus on presentations from them, and then a lively Q&A. It's going to happen at noon Eastern instead of 7 p.m. Eastern. That's a big change, and this is true for all of our Passive House Accelerator Live programming this year. We're going to move 7 hours earlier to noon Eastern, which means 9 a.m. Pacific and super early in New Zealand and in the middle of the night in Australia.
6 a.m. for me.
Yeah.
The day, so early start, bit of early breakfast.
Yeah, exactly. So my apologies to folks in Australia and New Zealand who might have a hard time being there live. We are doing some work to figure out something especially for you. So stay tuned for that. stay tuned for that. Anyway, we'll have a cool rotation of the Accelerator Live, where the first Wednesday of every month is going to be a 101 edition of the show. The second will be the Next Generation edition. The third will be Project Showcase, and the fourth will be Construction Tech. And it will always be at noon Eastern.
And if you like us and those times don't suit, then all of those are available to watch later on.
Yeah.
So definitely make use of that resource. And it's also really great to share. I mean, they're really educational and fun to watch, but they can also be really useful to pick up and send to people if they're a particular topic that you're wanting to share or talk about. I've used them like that and pointed people towards this. Said, hey, check this out, and so they're quite good to share as well. But it's all there available on the Accelerator website.
Yeah, and another announcement is that tomorrow we have a video producer who's going to be joining the team, Alex Wittek, awesome. Who is the kind of creative force, one of the creative forces behind a kind of viral architectural sensation in YouTube based in New York City. So he's really, really talented. And so we will be rolling out all sorts of video content for everybody around the world that showcases exciting projects, that provide simple explainers that you can share with colleagues or potential clients, all sorts of different kinds of video storytelling. So that's another thing that I'm super excited about in 2023 to share with everybody.
Great stuff. All right. Well, thank you for those two interviews this week and last week, Zach. Really appreciate it, and I'm glad you made the journey down to Portland to do those in person. And we'll be back again next week with some more news from around the place and another interview on the Passive House podcast. I'll talk to you then.
Thanks, Matthew.